Hello, folks. Now, look, I've been enjoying Arc Raiders just as much as the next man has over these past 5 or so weeks, having finally hit level 75 a few days ago, and having spent a generous amount of time in solos, duos, and trios. I've loved almost every second of the phenomenon that Arc Raiders is, but it cannot go without saying that this game is a complete and utter imbalanced mess. Despite its unique charm and constantly dynamic experiences, every player has by now had a handful of moments where they've taken a step back from the game, looked at it in utter disbelief, wondering why such an exploit or gameplay mechanic even exists, only to then dismiss it and go back to playing shortly after. I'm guilty of this too, and I think we can all agree it's down to just how goddamn good Arc Raiders is to play, at least most of the time. Or some of the time, depending on how good you are with a gun. But this does need to be highlighted and discussed. We have one of the most popular multiplayer games of this year, plagued with more issues and exploits than I think I've seen in a very, very long time. As a quick side note, head on over to AOA for all of your Arc Raiders needs using the code below, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring the channel. Now, just before we start, let me say right now that this game is only 5 weeks old as of the making of this video, and I do not think for a second that Embark should have figured out all of these balancing issues by now. I'm simply just pointing out that these issues exist, whilst hopefully invoking and adding to the discussion of them. I very much like this game, I intend to play and cover it for a long time to come, and so whether you disagree with this video or not, I made it with good intentions. Okay, so the first interesting thing to discuss here is just how fragmented the current community is. From social media posts, forums, discussions, and actual interactions in game, it has been apparent to myself that not all raiders think alike. We have a very extreme PvE community that almost view any form of PvP as bad. Whether you open fire on sight, rat around, call friendly, and then betray, all of it is bad in their opinion. Then we have the PvE enthusiasts who think in a similar way but don't begrudge the existence of PvP. They understand it's not for them, but still a part of the core gameplay loop. Then we have a large pool of players who couldn't care either way. Very much like myself, I sympathise with how hard some PvE objectives can be to do, but I love the PvE and PvE elements about as much as one another, and don't frown upon either. Then we have the more PvP inclined players, the ones most likely to open fire on sight, sneak around buildings, and generally just mostly push PvP. A large portion don't partake in the glitch exploits, betraying others, etc., and so we'll call this group the respectable PvPers. And then that leaves us with the dirty PvPers, the players most likely to use as many exploits as possible, as well as befriending and then betraying other players, whether it's for content, their own enjoyment, etc. Let me just say right now, I don't partake in this debate right here. My stance is, this is just a game, and as far as I'm concerned, we're all free to play it in any which way we like. If you want to betray everyone you meet, then that's fine by me. I don't encourage it, and you're completely deplorable for doing so, but who are any of us to tell anyone else what to do? There are, of course, many other subgroups around these, with various different opinions, and whilst I don't really want to partake in the discussion, I do point it out so as to highlight the fact that this community is currently very fragmented, and as a result, I understand not everyone will agree with what I say in this video. So, before diving into what I think are core issues with the game itself, let's briefly cover the plethora of current exploits that are already breaking the game on a fundamental level. Immediately after launch, players discovered they could glitch into locked rooms, as well as being able to ambush a ton of unsuspecting players. This was of course recently patched, however over the weeks many other exploits have been discovered, the most egregious being that players can clip into the terrain and then shoot through at any other players they can see, whilst remaining basically invisible and invincible. This can be done on multiple different maps and in multiple different spots, the hidden bunker event recently being temporarily removed due to players finding a way to glitch into there too. On top of this, we have some cases of players glitching into certain extracts on Stella Montis, waiting for other players to open the doors and then gunning them down before they can leave. And then we have the whole issue with latency and desync, causing players to be shot whilst inside of cover, and there's a very handy breakdown of it all right here, which I'll have linked below. Now, between all of this, the current playing field is scuffed to say the least. Whilst I'm not personally running into many other players that are exploiting the game, I appreciate that it is still an issue that affects a lot of others. And given how big and popular Arc Raiders is, in 2025, a game of this caliber should not be suffering from these kind of server issues. Nor should the game have gone so untested that these exploits even exist. These two issues are just about the most egregious that Arc Raiders has. Things like balancing and other gameplay mechanics can all be chalked up to the developers not quite knowing how things will go once the game launches, but fundamental issues with the servers and maps should be frowned upon quite a bit. I like Embark just as much as the next player does, but I won't glaze over poor development just because I really enjoy the game. Naturally, I'd like to see all of these issues fixed as soon as possible. I don't quite know how soon we could expect that, but I assume fixing these issues is definitely on Embark's to-do list. So, fingers crossed. Beyond this, however, I feel there's some deeper issues with the core gameplay loop, but due to how fragmented the community is, a lot of this feedback is being framed with emotion and then being dismissed by a lot of others. That's not always the case, but I think it's part of the reason at least. Some of these issues basically range from how inaccessible some of the endgame PvE is, how imbalanced trials currently are, as well as various factors surrounding things like free loadouts. Starting with trials, as it is the easiest to summarize, the core issue here is this. Each and every player who partakes will be thrown into a pool of other players, with the only restriction or filter being how soon that individual contributes points to the trial. I don't fully understand the why, but the what is this. A few weeks back, I was playing every day, and thus, once the trials reset, I was the first of my buddies to actually start partaking. One of my friends didn't hop on until a few days had passed, and then after progressing trials together, we saw that the player in the number 1 spot on his leaderboard had a significantly lower score than the number 1 player on my own leaderboard. Since this, I've done some research, and through just organic reasons, this has now happened to me after the recent reset. My friends are on much harder leaderboards as they started contributing day 1 of the trial reset, whereas I jumped on around day 2 or 3, and my leaderboard is significantly easier to compete in than that of my friends. Again, I'm not 100% sure as to why this is the case, but it's also not the core issue at play here, and is rather just a contributing factor. The core issue here is that the game is pairing players with a few hours of free time each week against players who have all day and every day to compete. Once these trials have progressed, you can only double promote within the top 10 spots, and then promotion only has 30 available spots too. When the vast majority of players are matched against players with seemingly no life outside of Arc Raiders, they stand absolutely 0% chance at competing within this, and thus the current trials pretty much serve as an additional way of the no life player base to get more of their fix, which is very much fine, but it does also completely neglect the casual player base entirely, which I feel isn't okay. Even for myself, the trials can be hard to compete, and I know for a fact that I have a fair bit more free time to play than the average player does, but even I can't compete with the no-lifes. And that's not to say anything bad about anyone who plays this game all day, every day. You do you, but it does highlight a core issue with how players are being matched against one another, and due to this, we have an endgame mechanic not being interacted with half as much as it actually should be. Because how can any of us even compete with that? Now, the solution here would be something along the lines of matching players against one another in a better way. I don't know whether this would be done best with time spent playing, how well they've performed in the trial so far, etc. But just on a fundamental level, something does need to be adjusted here. It is likely that these things can't and shouldn't be done mid-trials, so we can cross our fingers and hope that Embark are rolling out a solution to this once the next trials start. And again, all of the criticism here should come with the side note of, I understand this game is only just a month old at this point. Moving on to a completely different issue, I feel we should discuss the endgame PvE, and this almost goes hand in hand with the trials too. A lot of players have been reporting, discussing, or otherwise informing that they are completely done with trying to attempt endgame PvE, as regardless of strategy, they are plagued by other players constantly ambushing them. Whether they're hunting hornets for trials, large arc for parts, or trying to take down the queen or matriarch, the sheer number of other players that are inclined to hunt down anyone doing PvE is definitely the largest contributing factor to many people being put off attempting it. Some players blame free loadouts, but in my own experience, I've lost my most expensive PvE kits to players running actual loadouts. So whilst I do think there should be a discussion regarding free loadouts, I don't think they are the entire cause of the PvE issue. I think that it is much more likely, it just comes down to how much of a target you place on your back when doing this. If engaging in PvE to any extent, you're telling every other player who hears or sees you that you came into the game geared to at least some extent, and you're also preoccupied and spending some of your time and energy hunting Ark. And so you're spending less time looking for a potential ambush. Let me take you back to these 3 types of players right here, who are all very inclined to take advantage of this situation. This is just what it is, and whilst I think things could be improved a lot for PvE players, I also appreciate that this is likely the intended vision that Embark had when including PvP. However, I myself have lost a fair few kits worth more than 100k, because every second not spent fighting the queen or matriarch is spent fighting off countless waves of enemy players attempting ambush after ambush, and after so long, it all just gets to be a little bit too much. We've tried locking down entire rooms, floors, or buildings, we've sealed off inaccessible rooftops, we've placed an unreal amount of defenses, and I would say we have been switched on whenever partaking in these activities. But success rates have been astronomically low for us, despite winning fight after fight. Eventually, we do often crumble under the immense pressure of it all. We've even tried to befriend other raiders before starting the fight, paying for their protection or alliancing up, but this always still has casualties for these teams by the time some of the remaining few actually do extract. And this is all just to say that I completely understand all PvE players' frustrations. But I do also enjoy hunting PvE players myself, and whilst being on the receiving end can be frustrating, I don't think the core gameplay loop is actually at fault here. The issue we have is it's creating a sense of queens and matriarchs being off limits to the average player due to how expensive and incredibly difficult it can be to fight them. The amount of casual players that attempt this more than once or twice without getting a bad taste in their mouths will be minimal, and thus a lot of them will be put off. This even goes for hunting other Ark, like trying to complete the Bastion, Leaper, and Rocketeer trial. You really only have two choices: run around the map and destroy whatever you see, whilst also bumping into and being hunted by other players, or hold up in a defensive position and rotate between fighting Ark and defending against the wave of players that rush you. So what is the solution? Some players have suggested PvE events, similar to the Harvester, Matriarch, or Hidden Bunker, set timed events that players can jump into and do full PvE with zero fear of PvP, which I don't necessarily think is a bad idea. It certainly beats there being any core changes made to the current PvPvE flow of things, but I also don't think Embark would touch this anyway. They seem pretty firm on the game being what it is, and I think most of the player base like it this way too. It still doesn't change the fact that a lot of the PvE can be incredibly difficult to partake in, but outside of perhaps one or two PvE exclusive events, I wouldn't really know what else to suggest. Perhaps with time, we will see the landscape change shape, but as of right now, there is very little incentive for me to put together another 100k plus loadout, only to then spend the following 25 minutes fighting off everything that moves. I've had a much better time either running free loadouts on Stellar Montis or just taking a PvP-orientated kit into any other game instead. I would like to partake in more PvE, but currently I don't find it worth my time or efforts, and so until something is done, I'll spend my time elsewhere. However, that isn't a great philosophy for all of the more PvE-inclined players, and I sympathise completely with how tough PvP is making that experience. Okay, so between the fragmented community, plethora of exploits, inaccessible trials / PvE, and various other topics we didn't even really touch on, such as free loadouts, late game spawns, and spawn points, we can absolutely say that Ark Raiders is a complete mess right now. Somehow, despite all of these issues, the game is still incredibly fun and fulfilling to play, at least for most of us that is, with its lifespan forecast to be up to or over 10 years, and with Embark releasing updates every week for the game, it does go without saying that absolutely everything mentioned in this video will likely be addressed and change shape to some degree within the future. Who knows how things will look in months or years to come? Naturally, the exploits and fundamental issues with trials need to be addressed sooner rather than later, but a lot of the core issues right now may just fall into place once additional maps, enemies, events, and game modes have all been added. I probably should have said so more throughout, but as mentioned a few times already, I do love this game just as much as the rest of you. I simply want to spark the discussion, see how others feel about what I've showcased, and the few opinions of mine I have included along the way. I'm just an average gamer like the rest of you, and so my opinion counts for no more or less than anyone else's. And so if you don't agree with me, that's fine. I'm not at all saying that you have to. Anyway, do let me know your thoughts below, and I'll likely return to this subject again, depending on how this video goes and how Ark Raiders evolves over the coming future. But that would very much be it for this video, folks. I'll be back soon with plenty more, and I do of course have a range of guide and news videos on the channel already, so do feel free to stop on by and check things out. Otherwise, thanks for watching, folks, and until next time, peace.